Welcome to the very first episode of Dungeon Hammer. I am your host, Gershwin, and I'm here with...
The Sound Alchemist.
Docile Creature.
And today we're going to be talking about implementing horror in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. We all have experience both playing as DMs and players, but really this is more towards DMs and how you would create a horror-themed, maybe one-shot, or even an entire campaign. Docile Creature is like the OG DM in the group. So I'm going to pass it over to him and have him explain what his steps are when creating or implementing horror in D&D.
Well, I think depending on your style of DMing, you can do it in a bunch of different ways, but the way that I tend to do it is envisioning a certain scene, whether it be like the climax of your story arc or one shot or the big boss battle or just like a set piece moment in the adventure or the one shot, whatever you're doing, and building around that, whether it be the boss fight and you want to determine what your boss is, you want to make that we want the moment in the story that you want to make the biggest impact on your players.
Right. And I guess it's important then when you decide that you want to do a horror-themed session to have those scenarios first or those cutscenes or whatever. But depending on what type of scenes those are, it kind of can push you towards a certain type of horror theme, because there's different horror themes, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially if you're focusing on something more gory, that's going to be vastly different than if you're trying to implement a psychological horror campaign.
Yep. So let's talk about, well, there's a couple things, there's a couple genres of horror. So we came up with, obviously, like you said, horror. There are like suspenseful thrillers or slashers. There's even like horror comedy. And I guess the important part about creating a session around any one of those genres or topics is creating an atmosphere, right? You were talking about this in the beginning or before the show. The atmosphere that you create is probably one of the most important things to implement horror, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do to kind of set the mood for your D&D sessions, and some of it is simple as turning down the lights or turning the lights off. For example, one of my earlier campaigns, I got these big candles from Walmart or whatever and turned all the lights off, and the only light source was these candles. It was kind of hard to see the character sheets, but I think it kind of set the mood. They were in a cavern, in a cave, and just stuff like that. You can put music, spooky music in the background.
I think that's one of the most important elements in a good horror session, the music. Yeah. If you don't have a good soundtrack playing in the background, then your players kind of get lost in, I don't think you really need to be a good storyteller to build that horror atmosphere if you don't have a good soundtrack behind you.
Right. But sometimes silence is more effective than just having random spooky music in the background.
That's true, yeah. Not having any music at all. Well, I think it's important, though, in that situation, if you want to use no music and just have a room of silence, that can't be the norm.
So you have to at the right moment.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
It should be an abnormality.
Yeah. So start the session with a certain type of music, and then cut it off.
Especially when we're talking about horror, it's different from regular role playing games because it's all about the mood.
Yeah.
Like in having the right music and the right atmosphere, I feel like it's specifically in terms of horror games, it's very important. And differently from like your standard D&D game where it's not as important to have a really cool background battle music going on. It's definitely helps, but it's not as integral to the game as I feel like horror games.
Yeah, it really sets the scene when it is a good soundtrack. Now, moving on to like other ways to create the atmosphere, you have talked about or implementing smells. That's something that I've thought about doing, of like burning like wood, even having something that smells a certain type of like a nasty smell. Have you ever done anything like that?
I've never done it personally, but I got that idea from going to like a haunted house on Halloween time, and they had like cups of just scent of like they smelled like bathrooms or like barns or something like that in the rooms that really like added to the experience.
Yeah, added to the immersion.
It's kind of hard. I guess I've never really looked into that thoroughly, but I think it'd be hard to find smells
To fit everything. It's
Yeah.
like, what does a rotting slime
Yeah.
monster smell
Let me
like?
pull up the corpse that's rotting in my basement,
Yeah, right.
so that I can add the stink to this specific scene.
Yeah.
Luckily, I've got a shovel with some dried blood on it.
Yeah.
I'll use that.
Yeah.
Aside from that, you did talk about lowering the lights or changing the
The color of the light.
yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
That adds to the atmosphere. Something that the Sound Alchemist mentioned before the show was changing up the actual location that you normally run the game to add that like strange atmosphere.
Yeah. The thing about my session was that my characters, they're the leader of the party, so to speak, is Link, the character that most people know very well from like Zelda and all those video games. And Link is a very straightforward character. So I have an easier time than most to kind of railroad that session in a direction that I know Link would follow. So for example, they went into a palace, and that palace was essentially like a brothel. Women were being held up against their will, and obviously Link, being the courageous warrior that he is, wanted to save them. However, there was some weird magic going on, and he knew at that point in time he had no way of saving them and bringing them out in one piece. So they kind of went back, had to go get ready, and they brought another powerful warrior to help them in their endeavor. So I knew they were going to be fighting in the palace, but that's not where I wanted this whole horror aspect to take place. So I had to use both the terrain that I had at hand, which could be very hard. So I wanted it to take place in a graveyard. And to get from my palace to a graveyard, that could either take, depending on the whole campaign session, days to get there. Luckily, there was a dragonborn who was known as like the traveler, and he had a way of basically warping them to a graveyard. So this really helped me because my characters, they knew what they were getting into, but they didn't know about the whole graveyard scene. So kind of snapping them into what they thought was going to be a thunderous battle into a very spooky, suspenseful area that they're not familiar with. That's when the lights dimmed down, the music changed, and they now knew they were in some different atmosphere. And they had to play that way differently than they normally would.
Yeah, so changing up the scenery in the actual game is a good way to create like that different atmosphere, or at least show your players that, hey, this is going to be a
Right, because
horror.
not only did it change for the players, it changed for the people actually, sitting there.
Yeah, if you're going from a more traditional role-playing experience and transitioning into a horror arc, those signals can really help the players a lot to understand what's going on. If they're used to just breaking the door down, killing all the bad guys, and getting out of there,
Yeah.
and they go from this, this is spooky music, like all the lights are down low, those signals can be like, okay, this is not the same as what we've been doing.
Right.
Yeah. You also did bring up a good point, because we have that wargaming background. We love terrain. We love creating things that you can actually see, touch on the tabletop, and that's something that I think most dungeon masters don't really do. Mostly it's like theater of the mind, which has its huge perks, but I think going out purchasing terrain for a cool scene, especially in your situation, it was what was it, a graveyard?
Yeah.
That's important. And there's a lot of really good companies out there, like Games Workshop, that create really things that are going to make your players kind of say, wow. Yeah.
And if you're lucky enough to be doing that around October,
Yeah.
there's a lot of other places that have little
Yeah.
graveyard scenes and stuff that you can
All
buy.
those Halloween stores that randomly pop up, they've got some really great things that you could use your imagination and make it into a awesome set piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the props that you bring in to the table definitely can change the atmosphere, change the mood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that if you're going for more of a, I find it's traditionally pretty hard to jump scare your players at the table, but something that'd be really cool that I've never actually done, and I shouldn't be telling you guys because I want to do it to you, but if you're running a horror game, employ some outside help. So if you're dimming the lights, got the candles on, have like somebody else in the house that none of the other players know about under the table or something, so they can like grab a leg or scream right behind the player or something like that.
Oh, I'm really liking this.
That would yeah.
Yeah.
I want to do that, but it's yeah.
That'd be really great if you go into like a brothel and there's somebody hiding under the table that you don't know about.
I like that idea though, and especially if you're gonna do a one shot, go all out. Actually, get your spouse or brothers or sisters to hide in the other room, make noises, and don't tell the players. That's actually a really good way to create atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
What other ways do you guys think we can create a horror aspect or horror atmosphere? Because we can jump into the specific genres. Obviously, the most important tool in a DM's kit is just how they explain things.
Description is key.
Yeah.
It's very important, especially in horror.
Yeah.
I found that if you're gonna be doing a horror game, descriptions are important, but you don't want to over describe as well, because players are going to latch on if you're describing a room pretty vaguely, and then there's a wardrobe in the corner that looks kind of immaculately made, and it's like they're gonna and if you wanted that to be a secret or somewhat something they had to search for, they're gonna latch onto it right away.
Right. It's like, oh, there's a square rock over there, and there's an ornate square rock right next to it.
So you have to have like a level description. Like throughout the whole thing, you can't like over describe one thing and under describe another.
Unless you're rolling perception, and maybe the higher they get, the more descriptive it becomes.
Absolutely, yeah. The very first game I ever ran was a horror game, and I literally they were riding through a field, and I described that there were scarecrows, and one of my players was like, "That scarecrow's gonna come alive," and I was like, "Well, damn it, that's the whole purpose of this whole one shot," but it didn't ruin it too badly. But So you just have to be very careful with how you describe things. Maybe even leaving that stuff out. If I wanted the scarecrows to be a big thing and I didn't want the players to realize it right away, maybe that's not even something that their characters would notice.
But it's also very important to practice and know or kind of go through the description of a setting. So when you were describing your graveyard scene, I'm pretty sure you wrote some stuff down beforehand.
It's always better to have like at least, I wouldn't say write down everything, but any key points, definitely have like a script ready. If you're dealing with like a cult leader, have his like speech already pre-written and have that coincide with like the music. Maybe like you time your music that at 26 seconds in, there's a huge explosion, and that can be when he finally finishes his grand like incantation.
That's also hard to time too because your players will interject.
Definitely.
Just know that if you have a specific thing at 26 seconds, there's a chance your players are going to say something to interrupt you, or they're going to something's going to happen at the table, and it might. You just got to have a little wiggle room in there too.
Right.
Yeah. Because that is another challenge too. As a DM, you're trying to create this horror theme, and your players are probably not going to always be on board, but just stick to it. If you have the plan, even if they're joking around while you're trying to tell this creepy story, I guarantee you they're still gonna have fun.
And then you just kill the one that's being
You
an
could,
asshole,
yeah. use them as an example.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
But fear plays another huge point in any session.
yeah. There's two types of fears, right? There's the one that you can create through atmosphere, but also the mechanical fear of
Right.
like your player might die and that's it.
Or worse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we should go into that because as like there are different things that you can implement into the game that brings fear to the players.
Right.
The most obvious one is of course killing them and showing the party that I like you can choose somebody to kill on
This
purpose.
is going to be a lethal.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you were talking about that previously before we started recording with like red shirts and
Yeah, I think you should, in a horror game, to kind of set the rules, you should have plenty of people around the players that just die, and how they die. I
Yeah.
think that's and describing that in just brutal ways that'll really portray to the players that this is not the run of the mill.
right, especially if you have like a very low player count. Say you're only playing with 2 actual PCs.
Yeah.
Have them join like a party of 4 other people. That way, as they're traversing like a haunted house or whatever, you could pick off one by one without literally having to kill like half your party.
Yeah, it's very important though when you do things like that to create a background to those NPCs that you're gonna kill.
Yeah, because the more you give them a good background, the more emotional and more of a connection you'll have with them characters.
Yeah, you definitely want to connect those NPCs to the characters
Yes.
as quickly as possible, really. So if you're going
Mhm.
to kill them off pretty quickly, make them care that those people are dying,
Yep.
if you can.
Otherwise, it just becomes like one of
random-
those stereotypical
yeah.
horror movies where it's like, oh yeah, that guy's gonna die.
The gnome's gonna die
Yeah.
first.
And if you're going for that vibe, then you can do that. But
Yeah.
it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish with your horror arc or
Mhm.
one shot.
Definitely.
So that we can go into the actual specific genres of the horror or the broader horror theme. So one of the ones that whenever I think of horror, I think of blood, screams, and basically the goriness. And the best way to create, if you do want to create a scene that's gory, what have you guys done in the past to create that type of horror themed session?
I think, again, the key is just in the description. I mean, unless you want to literally just get like fake blood and spray it at the players, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
But just the way that you describe how people die, that's, I mean, in the game of D&D, for example, like that's really all you can do. Like just to get to the minor details of what's happening to this person that's dying or something horrible is happening to them. You can hear the skin being ripped from the muscle and stuff like that. Just like make it as gruesome as possible. And I think that'll add to the goriness.
I think it's also important to like go out there and read horror stories, kind of pick certain authors that you really like that speak on horror, and even just like bite off of their books or like their descriptions. When we were younger, there were those scary books. What were they called?
Jeez, I know what you're talking about. There's a
stories to tell in the dark.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. Like
there's a
going
movie
in
that
there.
just came out for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and going to those old books that I'm pretty sure every single player at the table is going to remember, and like throwing in scenes from those books. It's a cool way to, because all you have to do is repeat something that somebody else has said, and it's almost as if they already did the work of setting the scene for you.
Yeah.
So
There's
that's
no
what's
original
fun.
ideas, that kind of
Exactly,
thing. So
yeah.
you might as well use the best of what you can find. Maybe
Yeah.
just change things up a little bit.
And obviously, it won't, like you were saying earlier, it may not go 100% the way you want it to, because PCs are known for that.
Yeah.
It's not just it's not your story alone to tell. I mean, it's part of the PCs as well.
Right, because you could have the best horror story ever written, but if your players aren't enjoying it, then what's the point, really?
Right, yeah. Going on that topic, when it comes to horror or gory horror, one thing or one idea is to have something that in real life is not dangerous at all, and then make it dangerous. So having things like a child who joins the party who ends up trying to tear the eyelids off of the party when they go to sleep or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a good way to introduce, like, because I feel like that's grotesque and gory.
Gruesome.
The
Yeah.
fear of innocence gone bad.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can go all over the place with that. Hags are like a perfect example of things like that.
We literally just played against a hag recently.
Yeah.
Oh damn, I missed it.
Yeah. It was an emotional session. Yeah.
Yeah.
Use your players' fears. That's like maybe before the arc starts, ask your players what their characters' fears are.
Yeah.
So that you can implement them into the horror campaign, or maybe ask their players what the players' fears are. So then you can scare the players, and it'll reverberate through their characters.
Yep.
Like small holes.
No, I don't. Yeah, no, we're not gonna.
The
don't
smaller
mess with
and
phobias, right?
clustered they are, the better.
Going back to the minis, there are a couple really badass Instagram. What are they? Channels, pages,
Users.
yeah, of people who kit bash really grotesque and grimdark things. Use that as inspiration. Sometimes describing a monster is cool, but also putting down a tree with, like, what was it? Corpses hanging from it. That's an excellent way to create a horror theme. Even though, because what I'm talking about is we actually had a session where you brought in a tree with dangling corpses.
Yep.
And it wasn't a horror themed session. It was just that monster was badass. And to actually see it on the battlefield, take advantage of that.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then there are other genres of horror. One of the ones that was brought up at the beginning was kind of like a slasher. That has a lot of really badass possibilities. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
And if you think about Mike Myers or Jason, the rules of that are pretty simple. There's one thing that's coming after you. You probably can't stop it.
Yep.
So you have to find some way to survive.
Yep.
I think that you can. It's not typical to what D&D is. So it might be something that, like, the players, you have to show them with those red shirts. Like, listen, like, this is not something that you can beat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that should be, if you're going for a slasher vibe, I think that should be clear. You should make that clear to the players as much as you can. Like, this is not something that you can kill. You just have to find a way to get away or hide or something like that.
Yeah.
But with all the monsters in the monster manual to choose from, picking one of those to be like the centerpiece of your one shot or whatever, it's the slasher seems like a lot of fun to play around with.
Yeah, it's a very popular genre. Like you said, Mike Myers, Jason, even Chucky, I guess.
Freddy
Yeah.
Krueger, that's
Yeah.
a different like way to play in a slasher movie. It's not just like a person running at you with a knife. It's
Right.
in your dreams.
Yeah. Yeah, but then that also goes back to creating a really badass villain. So sometimes it might not be creating a scene, but you start off by creating an actual villain, and then that will be your guy who's chasing you around.
And
And
the
stuff.
whole adventure revolves around this one big bad.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that was done for one of our sessions was a really good introduction to the actual villains. Creature was the DM for this session, and what he did in the beginning, he kind of showed us, or he described to us, the murder of I think a little boy's family.
Yeah.
Didn't tell us who did it, why it happened. That was for us to find out. But creating that monster or creating that villain and then throwing it at the party at the beginning is a great way to kick off the horror.
And I think genre-wise, something that complements horror really well is mystery.
Yeah.
Like, I think the two genres, like, they work together really well. So that I think if you're going to go for, like, that can be the whole basis of a whole campaign is a murder happens and you got to figure out why.
Yeah.
Or who.
Yeah. Or what?
Yeah, because if there's a monster chasing you and you don't know what it is, that itself is going to cause some paranoia. I was reading earlier of a DM who was trying to somehow find a way to actually scare his players, because his players were always goofing off, joking around, and he decided to make a dungeon where literally almost everything on that dungeon was a mimic. Oh, there's a door. Nope, there's actually a monster in there. Oh, there's a chest with gold overflowing. Yep, it's a mimic. It's going to eat you. So they were so scared of touching anything that at one point he even said, oh, this panel on the floor or this stone brick piece of the wall, that's a mimic. So he kind of just made him be afraid to the point of they have no idea what to do, what their next move would be, in fear of having another fight on their hands.
Yeah, I feel like if you do that, you're going to be in that dungeon forever, though.
Yeah,
because they're going to be tiptoeing through each room,
yeah,
checking every little thing,
perception
to see if it's a
checks
mimic,
all over.
and then if they are a mimic, there's going to be a lot of combat.
Right. He said this was more of a punishment than anything, but still,
Gotcha.
It's an interesting take on trying to scare your players from doing something.
Mechanically scare them in a way.
Yeah.
Not describing the actual villain, and like you said, just keeping it a mystery, it is one of like the better things you can do too. If something keeps snatching the players from the shadow, you leave it to the player to create whatever scary thing they can come up with.
Right.
You see that a lot in horror movies. Like
Yep.
they don't show the
The
big
villains.
bad until like the end of the movie,
Yeah.
if at all.
Right. Yeah.
Cloverfield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Shaky cam.
It definitely adds to the fear, though, if you don't even know what you're fighting.
Yeah, and then it just gives that power to the actual player.
How do you feel about having the main villain be an actual character, like an actual PC?
That's been following the party along.
Yeah.
I think it would bother me as a player, just because it seems kind of like a gimmick that is done a lot. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do it. There's some cool ways you could probably implement that, right?
I think it would be better in a one-shot with new characters. Like if you're saying, I just want to run a quick horror one-shot, come with characters, just make level 3 characters, whatever, come, and don't expect a long campaign out of this.
Yeah.
I think that's when you can do that and it really shine. Because if you have your level 10 characters and all of a sudden one of these guys has been a bad guy the whole time and tries to kill you, it's not going to feel good for the characters, especially if they survive. It'd probably be very fun for the person that's the mole. That's like, oh, I've been evil the whole time. But for everybody else, it'll be like, oh, okay, either we kill you or you kill us. And then there might even be like tension at the table. It's like, well, we've been playing these characters for 10 levels. Like, I have a lot invested in this character.
Unless you change it to where it was all a dream. So now these ramifications have no effect because it's just happening in a dream that everybody magically was sharing.
Yeah, you have to be really careful with those types of scenarios because it could piss off a lot of the players.
Right, it's like, oh, we just wasted a whole session where we could have been doing something else.
Nothing really happened.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you make real world consequences of that dream.
Right, like that dream. Everybody was sharing that dream because they were being followed by a lich or something like
Maybe
that.
if you just want to plant the seeds of mistrust within the party,
Yep.
like, oh, this guy killed me in our dreams. Maybe there's something going on. Maybe this is a sign from something.
Yeah. Because at least when you're doing that, you've shared 10 levels of sessions together.
Yeah.
You there's a less chance of you thinking, oh, the barbarian must be the one killing him. It's like, no, he saved me literally last session.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to the other themes, something that you're not going to escape as a DM is having the players crack jokes while you're trying to be serious and do something horror related. But you could use that to your advantage and do a horror comedy themed session.
Like Shaun of the Dead kind of thing, something like that. Where
Scary movie.
There's horrific things going on, but it's kind of more lighthearted.
Yeah. You can still be super grotesque. You can have people. You can have worms coming out of people's butts, which is funny.
Yeah, and that'll add to both the horror and the comedy.
Exactly.
Like
yeah.
it'll make a different atmosphere.
Yeah. One of you guys mentioned before of putting the actual party into a like haunted house and having the different like gaming mechanics. Act wacky to the party. But it's all about like just creating.
Yeah, again, it feels like it all stems to the atmosphere.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
that and knowing your players, like what are they
Yes.
going to enjoy?
Right.
If you know they're going to be cracking jokes the whole time, no matter what atmosphere, then you might as well try to go the more comedy horror route because it's
Right.
just going to serve your party or your players better.
Or like, for example, if you're always playing on your kitchen table, maybe change it to the attic or, like you were saying, down in the basement. Maybe one of your players is afraid of the dark. Dim down the lights. That's going to make that player feel a little more uneasy.
Go out into the woods, draw a pentagram, get a Ouija board,
There you
start
go.
talking to spirits.
Yeah.
Really set the mood. Go
Mhm.
big or go home.
Take advantage of those people. Now, these are all tips for a DM. As a player, since we're already talking about this, you do have to go into a horror-themed session with the intent to roleplay that your character will be scared. I think if you are a player and you know that the DM is taking his time to try to create some badass horror-themed session, don't be a dick and act like nothing scares your actual character.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the DM's game. It's the whole players make the story as well. So if you're not taking any of the horror seriously, it's going to take the wind right out of the sails, and it's not going to feel horrific at all.
Yeah.
The wind right out of the sails.
That's right.
Wow, docile creature. That was a very docile image that I just received from you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, because it's very easy to want to piss off the DM, especially when the DM holds all power. But be respectful of the fact that he is trying to create an atmosphere for you.
Yeah, he's trying to make a fun time for everybody.
Right.
So,
So even though it looks like he might be favoring one person in the party,
That's different. That's way different. That's a whole nother topic on its own.
but if you feel like your character as a player, if you feel like your character in this situation wouldn't be scared of anything, and you know your DM's trying to be creating a horrific atmosphere, just make your character scared of something. It's not gonna hurt.
right?
Your character's still gonna be a badass. It's still gonna be this
Yeah.
cool thing that you've built up.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't hurt to make your character afraid.
Right, because in D&D, that is the whole point, to make your character like this badass fighting machine or like the best they can be. So you always want to implement some type of like fear or some type of hindrance to your character. That way they don't come off as like the big bad Mary Sue, scared of nothing, can take on anyone.
Yeah.
Because that humanizes them and it makes them more grounded to the world that they're playing in.
Have you ran into that problem with the character that plays Link for you?
Link has the Triforce of Courage, so the way we did it is that he is immune to being frightened,
Ooh.
which sucks.
Well, the mechanic or
The mechanic of being
okay.
frightened. He is immune because obviously Link has the Triforce of Courage. Like he's supposed to be that adventurer that goes out regardless of any injury to himself. So that's a little hard to work around. So I'm doing this in a way of, like I know he was going to go save, the women from the brothel. However, the other two party members are kind of following him, and that could be to their detriment. If they know Link is going to charge in head first, I could use them as, shields or as like a means of like, don't charge in, Link, because the enemy now has, your other party members, and they're going to torture him if you fight back.
Yeah, using the other players to kind of control that one stubborn player is a good way to get around that as a DM.
Right.
Yeah, or make the red shirts that they bring along like family members.
Yeah. It's like, my mom, we're going into this fun haunted house.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be like an actual like serial killer in there. It's like, yeah, you don't just have to worry about yourself. You got to protect your mom now.
Your character may be fearless, but they still don't want something to happen to the person that they care about.
Right.
Right, yeah. And then one genre that we didn't talk about, ironically, even though we are Dungeon Hammer, is Grimdark, or that type of
The 40K aspect of it.
yeah. Well, because the scariest thing in 40K is definitely the Demon Kulabas.
Hands down.
For all those that don't know, the Demon Kulaba is basically what happens when the Iron Warriors. I'm assuming that everybody listening right now and has a basic knowledge of 40K. If you don't, check out our 40 facts on the Iron Warriors. But basically, they were trying to create superhuman warriors, and they did that by sewing together two women through the womb.
Right. Basically, one woman's womb is not big enough to cultivate.
The super baby.
Yeah, so you gotta stitch two women together at the womb.
And they have to stay. They have to be alive, so
Right.
they're being fed, and then they're being kept alive. And then once the actual super baby is born, they just discard the
carcass,
the carcass.
because that super baby rips its way out of its mothers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, both mothers, right? Because there's
Yeah,
two.
because they're both sewn together. Yeah.
And that is how you create
Grimdark
darkness,
horror.
right? It borders on gory, honestly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Also on like body horror too, like
Yep.
stitching
Yeah.
two people together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important. Explaining villains and having certain appendages be different sizes than normal. Big heads.
Little heads.
Little heads.
Bulging veins.
There we go. But how else have you guys been able to implement like grim darkness? Because it does just kind of blend into gory.
Yeah.
It's more of like a atmosphere of the whole campaign. Like whatever they do, everything just feels hopeless, or nothing is really feels like the right thing to do. No matter what, you're having to make decisions that are not good decisions. They're just the lesser of two evils kind of thing.
Right.
That's a really good like before the session even starts, and then creating a bunch of scenarios where, like you said, whatever they decide to do, if they decide to kill this creature, nothing positive is going to come out of it.
Like the Saw movies kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
That's
I'm
exactly
gonna get out
what I
of
was
this room,
thinking.
but I got to cut off my fingers.
Yeah. That there's a lot of fun you can have with that aspect of horror. Yeah. And then of course there's the Eldritch horror, so Cthulhu, and you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. It depends. Like, if you want to play D&D, Cthulhu is definitely there. Like, there's plenty of monsters in the monster manual that you can add to more Eldritch horror. But you might want to play Call of
Tentacles.
Cthulhu. Yeah, all the tentacles. But I think the hallmarks of Eldritch horror is like psychological, like insanity horror. Like, you're seeing things that are breaking your mind.
The actual the DM guide, right, has the ability for you to implement, what was it?
Optional
sanity?
rule for a sanity score.
Yeah, and then there's another one too. Have you ever run a game with sanity?
I never have.
No.
It sounds like a lot of fun, but it would. I feel like you'd have to test it out in a one shot.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't think it's something you could just implement in an ongoing game.
What I was gonna do, because I was gonna do for the 40K inspired D&D campaign that I was running with you guys, what I was gonna do is implement the insanity, have an insanity check, because you guys are gonna go into the warp, or what I interpreted as the warp, and what I was gonna do is, based on that score, bad things would happen to your characters in terms of losing limbs, in terms of like altering just the way you play the character, and I thought that's a cool way to implement that theme of like Cthulhu and ever changing and just running the game that way.
Yeah. The thing I just thought about right now is if you are incorporating like the gods, like the chaos gods and stuff like that,
Yeah.
maybe have them right off the bat, like their ship gets stranded in the warp, and the only way to have it exit is to pledge yourself to one of these gods. So now, depending on which god you have detriments. Say your party all pledges to Nurgle, and Nurgle now removes one eye, so now you don't have dark vision anymore, or your vision is cut in half, or you got tentacles for a leg, speed is cut in half. And then put them into a scenario where now they gotta not just survive and live in this state where you're at a severe handicap.
Yeah, a really cool thing you can do with those type of scenarios is create a chart and let the players know that this chart is out there. So if you fail your sanity check, if you go and even like look at this god that is in front of you, you're gonna roll on this chart, and this chart has some really messed up things that can happen to your character.
Yeah, and I feel like Eldritch Horror specifically kind of requires your players to be more what's the word? More into it, like more part of it, because they're gonna have to role play sanity, and which is, it sounds like a lot of fun. Like as a player, it'd be really cool to be like, oh, whatever this insanity chart does, you have to role play that now.
Yeah.
It sounds like it'd be a really cool time, but it's something you have to have full buy-in from your players to kind of explore the full aspects of Eldritch Horror.
It might be a little bit more difficult for like a brand new player jumping in.
Yeah, definitely.
When it still feels awkward to be role playing, it's like, oh, now I got to role play like not being able to see or something like that.
Because most new players kind of just play themselves as a fighter or a wizard or something. So like, okay, now be insane. It's like, what?
Yeah, the handicaps are difficult to actually role play and stuff. Also, you have to be careful too, because if you do something like that and it's just a one shot, but your players have had these characters for a while, and all of a sudden now they're blind, that could piss off some players.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. Don't make it a dream at the end, though.
No.
Or you could be like, because the thing about this too, having to roll in a chart, if you're not aware of what options are in the chart, you could definitely feel like, oh, maybe the DM is just like really hammering on this one guy and favoring the other one.
Well, yeah, we're gonna have to do a whole video on favoritism, because it's been brought up twice and it's a growing problem. The chart, having the chart and showing the characters the players the chart, does get rid of like.
But it takes away the fear of not knowing what you're going to get.
Yeah, I wouldn't show them the chart, but I would let them know, hey, there's structure to what I'm doing to you guys. It's not just coming out of my head.
Yeah. So doing something like that, where you mentioned that there's multiple gods maybe, and a way you could describe it without saying like, oh yeah, there's a chart that I'm rolling on, is saying like, depending on which god favors you or doesn't favor you, or you look at, it's gonna hurt you in these ways. You had, I don't remember if they were, I don't know what they were, but they were villains and they represented see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil.
Yeah.
Using those aspects to get rid of, or to kind of like, that is your chart. So if one of your players does something to the see no evil, all of a sudden they're blind, or all of a sudden they whenever they look at another dimension. It's not even the dimension that's in front of them.
The way I made that work, for example, see no evil, he saw the world as being 100% evil, so he clawed his eyes out to kind of represent that. So in a way, they're kind of like the opposite of what they are.
Okay.
And like the characters use that to a huge advantage. Seeing that it was actually a spider demon that was see no evil, so he gouged out all his 8 eyes. A character realized, oh, he's a spider demon. He has 8, empty eye sockets. Let me cast Greater Restoration and restore sight to this guy. Yeah. And obviously the bombardment of having sight after so many years of being blind and all his senses going wild gave them the opportunity that they needed to escape this huge villain.
It's a cool out-of-the-box way of getting past the situation.
Definitely. Yeah. When normally it's like, oh, I'm just going to keep attacking it.
Yeah,
it's like,
just hit it until it's dead.
Yeah, it's like, oh no, like I got to actually use my mind and think for once.
Yeah, the thing about Eldritch Horror, though, is definitely make the gods seem almost unbeatable.
Definitely.
Or make them unbeatable.
Yeah, they almost should be unbeatable. Yeah. Like you don't even necessarily ever get a chance to physically interact with them. Yeah. Like they're in your brain or something like that, but you might see avatars or like little minions of theirs, but like you never interact with Cthulhu.
Right.
He's just like this immense being of power that you know about, but
Yeah, I've never played Call of Cthulhu, but based on what I hear, it is one of those situations where if you do run into combat, you're done. Like the party is going to die.
Yeah, you're going to be in a rough way after that if you survive.
And with that said, it would be really fun for you to do a one-off on a different game. So like run a Call of Cthulhu game, just a one-shot, so that you can get different ideas of how that game is structured, and then bring that over to D&D. I tried to do that with Dark Heresy. Dark Heresy. I read the Dark Heresy book, and I was trying to use different things from Dark Heresy into D&D. So just learning how to play a different game and then coming back to play D&D is a good way to have a different aspect of how to run a certain type of thing. In this situation, it would be horror.
Yeah, I think that both like atmospherically and mechanically, like how do they handle insanity and stuff like that would be cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Is there any other advice that you guys have for running a horror session?
Nothing that I could think of off the top of my head, but definitely the two things you have to incorporate is the atmosphere. That is key. The atmosphere, and I think having models to represent what you're doing, where you're at, is also huge. Because if you're just like in a haunted house, but you don't describe, there's like a switch on this side of the board, like we were talking about earlier, perception and trying to look at things in a horror thing may be better than having to imagine everything.
Yep.
Unless you're really good at describing things. Like,
right.
Unless you're confident enough that you can describe things perfectly to implement or to convey horror. But I definitely agree, like having the physical, because sometimes the stuff in your mind is scarier
worse
than what
than you see
on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just make sure to plan it out beforehand, though.
Yeah.
Being prepared is key.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you guys have any suggestions for either DMs or players on running a horror themed game, just comment down in the comment section below. Yeah, do you guys? And that's our advice then for running a horror themed. Give us examples of how you guys ran a horror one shot. Down in the comment section below. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. This is the very first podcast of Dungeon Hammer, and it's something that we're going to be doing every week, usually Thursdays. Well, I'm not even going to say a day because who knows. But it's going to be we're going to dedicate at least one podcast to a topic of Dungeons and Dragons because we're trying to implement more Dungeons and Dragons videos into the channel. And then at the same time, we want to use me and the Sound Alchemist's past history with Warhammer 40k and kind of introduce fresh new ideas to the Dungeons and Dragons world. And obviously the Docile Creature is the newest member of the One Mind Syndicate, who is the experienced DM. He's the reason that we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. So we're
the reason he's playing Warhammer 40k.
Yeah,
true,
it's
yeah.
true. Yeah, so we're kind of sharing our thoughts, and this podcast is supposed to be that. It will get better once we get used to the setup. But just like when you're creating a horror campaign, being prepared is important, and that's what we're going to try to do in the future. If you guys have any other topics that you guys would like us to talk about when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, please comment in the comment section below. Any like questions or comments as far as like how to do something in Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, with that said, we'll talk to you guys later.
This has been the Sound Alchemist.
Docile Creature.
Gershwan.
And we are signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.